All right, here is one of the more interesting candidates going out for the Democratic nomination this year, and that is, I hope I'm saying this right, Tulsi Gabbard, or Gabbard. She is a Democrat from Hawaii, formerly part of the Bernie support campaign, and she announced her candidacy, and let me tell you, she has been getting hit all over the place. And I'll kind of go through some of that here in this video. Hopefully today won't be that long. It'll be kind of a short video. Just trying to help people find research and see what's going on here. Immediately, when Rep. Tulsi Gabbard was elected to Congress in 2012, amid an ocean of positive press, the Iraq war veteran seemed like a sure thing for a 2020 presidential run. Now, I'm pretty sure that when she was elected as a state representative, she was probably not really thinking about 2020 presidential run. She was probably thinking about what can I do for my community, as I would assume a lot of Congress people are initially. That's because the one-time progressive star has alienated many of her early supporters over her conservative stance on Islam and foreign wars. Now, I don't know that you have read a lot about this. She is against foreign wars, which is apparently a conservative stance now. Conservatives, what you would think of as that as a Republican Party, were always considered the war hawks, meaning they wanted to go to war, and now not wanting to be involved in foreign wars makes you a conservative. Conservative stance on Islam. We'll have to get into that one here shortly, but Gabbard initially excited the left because she was an outspoken economic progressive and a veteran who objected to American intervention abroad. She was also the first Hindu member of Congress, so she is a triple minority star. She is a minority religion. She is a woman, and she's not white. She is Indian. All of these things are positive points. However, but the following years, Gabbard staked out foreign policy positions that shocked her allies. She joined the Republicans demanding Barack Obama use the term radical Islam. When you have radical Islamist groups doing radical Islamist things, she wanted them to say that, separating radical Islamists from actual Muslims. However, that is apparently evil now. She was a member of Congress most willing to advocate for Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad. She dubbed herself a hawk on terrorism. Reporters documented worrying about ties to anti-LGBT groups, including one run by her father, and anti-Muslim Hindu nationalists. All right. Anti-LGBT groups run by her father and anti-Muslim Hindu nationalists. Now, Hindu nationalists are people who live in India, who love India, and I don't know if you know this. India was separated from the Muslim groups, which are, I believe, Bangladesh and Pakistan, and the whole of what we call India was set aside for the Hindu religion. So that's the breakdown there. If you are generally Hindu, you probably live in either a foreign country or India. Very unlikely you live anywhere else. Gabbard has defends these positions with some more persuasive than others. She seems to have sincerely changed her mind on LGBT issues, defends her position on terrorism, so we should fight terrorism, and as a necessary response to the serious threat from jihadism to the United States, argues her outreach to the Syrian government is part of an effort to open up the space for peaceful solutions to conflict. Newsflash for everyone out there. When Trump said he wanted to pull U.S. troops out of Syria, it was a group of Republicans and Democrats who still want to continue fighting in Syria, even though there are no clear goals or clear policies or anything involved in that conflict. The U.S. is involved, Russia is involved, Syria is involved. The U.S. is funding some terrorist organizations in the region, as well as other civilian fighting groups. Russia is backing Assad, and essentially it's a new Cold War. We are on the verge of starting that back up, and I know that that is something that is very hard to understand, but the Democrats are generally in their stance saying that we should stay involved, keep fighting, and with no end in progress. This is a complete flip-flop of reality. Tulsi Gabbard, what does she still believe in? This is Pete from New Yorker. They go through it. All these different groups are trying to paint a positive light and then spin it very negatively. All politicians must act as if they enjoy patriotic ceremonies, but Gabbard is one of few who seems if she's not acting. She's 36, has a knack for projecting both youthful and joyful grown-up gravitas. Her political profile is similarly hybrid. She's a fervent Bernie supporter Sanders. Now, during the 2016 election, when it was, she's one of the people who helped release the information that Hillary had basically stolen all the primaries from Bernie by using essentially force, coercion, and money to take that away. She stepped out. This has broken her as far as a DNC mainstream candidate. They are pushing against her, and you can kind of see the political machine working. She is a vegetarian, a practicing Hindu, the first one ever elected. Lifelong surfer and accomplished athlete on Capitol Hill. She is a Hawaiian action figure. All this, look at all this going on. Let's keep sliding down. Friends say she's poised. And then here, let's come down to the end of the article. When Gabbard entered politics, she was 21, and in those early years, she was a social conservative. Pro-life, which you can be a Democrat and be pro-life. It has nothing to do with anything other than children's lives. Active in the fight against same-sex marriage, which almost every politician in the country was against same-sex marriage. It was a huge push to get that over. And I still personally believe it should be called civil unions. I don't know that the idea of marriage as a religious ceremony should be flipped over into civilian into law. But hey, is what it is. She is now pro-choice, pro-same-sex marriages. On these other issues, she has evolved enough to be almost, but not quite, at home in the contemporary Democratic Party, which is increasingly progressive, particularly in issues of gender and sexual orientation. Now, gender and sexual orientation. Gender is a word that's being thrown around now, which essentially means fashion. Sexual orientation is now more important than anything else, because if you're straight, member of the majority, apparently that's evil towards people who are not straight. The exact nature of her political evolution is not easy to apprehend, especially since Hawaii is not known for political centrism. Talks about how blue Hawaii voted. Then many of the Clinton voters were unhappy to surprise. Later, 2 weeks after the election, Gabbard agreed to meet with Trump and make the case for non-interventionist foreign policy. Don't get into wars in other countries. A few months later, she flew to Syria, met with Bashar al-Assad, who is presiding over a brutal civil war. She agreed that the United States should not intervene to stop it. Our intervention has done almost nothing there except get billions of dollars spent and thousands of people killed. We've restrained ISIS, and once that's over, should we be nation builders? Is that the U.S.'s job? Man, look at this. All this word salad going through. Skip to the next one. What is Tulsi Gabbard fighting for? This is from The Intelligencer. Rising star on the left, she was elected. First Hindu elected. She became polarizing. She's also a veteran. She became one of the most polarizing and popular figures of the progressive movement when she broke with the Democratic establishment and endorsed Bernie Sanders. back in the day. We're going to kind of skip through this. But ironically, while Gabbard's anti-war bona fides that were both the motivation for her initial run to Congress and her impetus as a rising star, it's her foreign policy views that are raising questions on the left. The left is now wanting to continue fighting wars. Stop arming terrorists. All right, so in her public rhetoric, Gabbard rejects much of the U.S. intervention across the world as a Democrat. That anti-interventionist puts Gabbard to the left of her party's establishment. She's been critical of former Barack Obama's foreign policy and priorities. And again, her Stop Arming Terrorists Act, which was introduced in the Senate by Rand Paul, would severely curtail U.S. interventionists by stopping American funding of armed groups that are fronts for terror organizations named Al-Qaeda. Not arming terrorists is against what the left wants to do. This is so strange. Most of these things on anti-interventionalists are them saying she's, by getting out of the wars, she is just wrong because they want to continue the wars. I read through some of her presidential page. Some of the stuff is tolerable, some of it's not. GMO labeling, I don't know that that's ever going to go anywhere. Gun control, most people don't understand that we have extremely sensible gun control that works very quickly and very effectively already in the country. Need massive infrastructure. Marriage equality, I'm pretty certain that's already a law that's passed and is in effect. Native Hawaiian issues, don't really care. I'm not Native Hawaiian. And then here we come to some of the smear pieces coming out. Tulsi Gabbard, white nationalist and Russian propaganda machine, throws support behind 2020 candidate. This is the Independent. This is a real story. This is something going on. NBC News analysis showed sites linked to Russian influence operations celebrated her announcement. This is actually them rehashing a tweet from a site that has been completely removed. It was found to be a fake account, a fake troll, and NBC still ran with it. It is a blatant lie, that first part. And then here we go. Where is the white supremacist? NBC News, when she celebrated Gabbard's announcement when she said on CNN she was expecting to launch a formal bid in the coming weeks, defended her position on Russia and her 2017 meeting with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. So now she's a Russian troll because a fake site, which has already been proven fake through that NBC decided to retweet, has already proven it's wrong. And there you go. I strongly denounced David Duke's hateful so-called support multiple times in the past and rejected support. So if you have something that someone on the farthest extremist white supremacist like, you are now their candidate. This is something that we've seen through Trump for the last few years, and it's really strange. Here is a Hindi Indian woman receiving the support of the Klan. So she must be a Klan member because one issue she has their support on. Yeah, that's reality now. Tulsi Gabbard, Syrian dictator Assad is not the enemy of the United States. I still don't know where Assad became our enemy. I remember back in the Iraq war where this was kind of a known issue. He was one of the many countries who we found that were going along with this in the actual attack on Saddam Hussein. Yeah. What they try and do, if you ever watch this interview.
David, I wanted to ask Congresswoman Gabbard, you brought a very interesting guest last night to the State of the Union.
Yes.
A prominent Syrian politician who's part of the group we've been allying with in northeast Syria that's been keeping the peace there. And I'm wondering what you told this Syrian politician about what's ahead for them and as the American troops begin to pull out. Are they at risk of being slaughtered in those areas, and what should we do about it?
Well, I think more importantly, I heard from her their concerns about Turkey's threats, knowing that if there is a pullout of U.S. troops overnight and it's too hasty, then the Kurds, who have been our most effective fighting force against ISIS in Syria, will be left to Turkey's slaughter. She referred to what has already happened in places like Afrin in Syria to know what would lie ahead if there is not an opportunity for the Kurds in the northern part of Syria to broker some form of security agreement that will allow them to, frankly, protect their homes and protect their families going forward. She also said, we never expected the United States to keep soldiers there forever. They always knew it would be a temporary situation focused on fighting against ISIS. All she's saying is give us the space to be able to make sure that we are able to secure ourselves before the United States pulls out all of our troops.
Did she ask you why you met with Assad?
No, she didn't. But we had a discussion about that, and she recognized why I met with him and agreed with that meeting, because she knows how important it is that we be willing to meet with adversaries or potential adversaries, not just our friends.
Do you think Assad is our enemy?
If we are serious about the pursuit of peace.
Do you think
Now keep asking your questions, overlady. I'm sorry, I don't know why the
Assad is our enemy?
Assad is not the enemy of the United States because the Syria pose a direct threat to the United States.
Now, Syria is on the other side of the world and has basically no ability to attack us in any way, shape, or form, which is what she's saying. She's trying to talk about the conflict there that's on the ground, what's really happening, and they're trying to say that Syria is a direct threat to the U.S. Some I believe they like to use the words existential threat. However, Syria hasn't been a threat to the U.S. ever, nor really could it be.
What do you say to Democratic voters who watched you go over there, and what do you
Look at that. I don't
say
know.
to military members who have been deployed repeatedly in Syria, pushing back against Assad?
People who have been deployed to Syria have been there focused on their mission, which has been to defeat ISIS. Our troops have not gone to Syria to wage yet another costly, destructive regime change war.
Now, there you go. What would you say to the people that were over there? I would say that we've defeated ISIS. They are gone. And now it's time for you to come home. Your job is done. We're not there so you can conquer yet another small country and install a dictator that we choose. And, yeah. So from a person who fought in Iraq to a person who has probably never considered it.
And many troops I hear from express frustration at the fact that our country continues to wage senseless, costly regime change wars, followed by nation-building missions, leading to situations like we see in Afghanistan.
Now, the whole thing she's saying is we go to a country, we change the regime, we install our own people that we want, and then exactly the thing that's happening now happens. The terrorists pop up because it is an election that we oversaw that they don't consider justified. They start fighting again, and then we do it all over again. The U.S. should not build nations. That is not the role of the military or the role of our country. We should not interfere unless it's a direct threat.
So many examples of our troops being deployed, their lives put on the line, without understanding what the clear mission or objective is and how that mission actually serves the security of the American people in the United States.
Which I think a lot of Americans would agree with you there. But again, going back to Assad.
But then again, I don't want this to be the point. I don't think people should agree with you that we shouldn't do that. We should go after...
Assad is not an enemy. Is he an adversary?
Yes. Can we make anything about this seem like we should stay there?
The United States.
We have to look to who poses a threat to the United States and the American people.
I understand that, but there are a lot of people who don't pose a direct military threat to the United States who consider themselves to be adversaries of the United States.
Now, that is, would they consider themselves an adversary? Not should we, do they?
Vladimir Putin poses or considers America to be an enemy.
Now, there is no proof of that. Russia is entangled with the U.S. in Syria and in possibly in the Crimea, but in no other way. He's not fighting us on trade. He's not attacking the U.S. outright. They have a few $1 million they spend harassing people online that makes national news.
We consider Russia to be an adversary. I'm just asking you, do you consider Assad to be an adversary of the United States?
When I look at whether it's Syria or Turkey or Russia or China or other countries in the world, I look at what are their interests, and are their interests counter to our interests.
So what would you say he is to the United States if you cannot say that he's an adversary or an enemy?
Yeah, please make a statement so I don't have to do any thoughts or reflection.
What is Assad to the U.S.? What is the word?
You can describe it however you want to describe it.
I want to know how you describe it.
My point is that whether it is Syria or any of these other countries, we need to look at how their interests are counter to or aligned with ours.
Are interests aligned with ours?
What are Assad's interests?
Assad seems interested in the slaughter primarily of his own people, in part. I mean, how does that line up? Survival, yes.
Exactly.
Well, he also
and he seems to be willing to go to great ends to do that.
He also uses weapons of mass destruction on his
adversary
as well.
I mean, we can talk about all these things. My point here is...
Is it important to talk about these things?
It's
that he uses chemical weapons on his own people?
Of course, of course. It's important to talk about how our military is being used, what it is costing them, what it is costing the American people, and whether or not those missions, those objectives serve the security of the United States.
Now, the chemical weapons thing, I believe, came up in the past. I actually have a Syrian timeline kind of here at the end. But why is Assad a threat to the U.S.? When did Assad threaten the U.S. or anything like that? And there's really no answer overall. The Islamic State was a threat to the U.S. Assad fought back against the Arab Spring, which happened a few years ago, and you'll note that the regime change in Egypt and Libya and lots of Arab countries basically had revolts. Assad held on and fought back that, and this is kind of what all this comes out of. Assad fighting and killing his people in a civil war, should the U.S., anytime there's a civil war, should we go and destroy that country and rebuild it as we see fit? Decades ago, this was the policy of the U.S. in South America, and George Bush did it in Iraq, and then George did it again in Iraq again. And now we see it's shifted. Republicans are slowly moving away from the idea of going to war, and Democrats, if you're not willing to go to war and do this because bad people, you are a horrible person. Jacob, and I've never heard of this before, this is a new one here. Tulsi Gabbard is not your friend. She's young, she served, she's a rising star of the Democratic Party. She might win the presidency in 2020. Her personal endorsement of Bernie Sanders. Now, it's over. I mean, this is a full-on attack of how she is a conservative, which apparently is a bad word. Denouncing LGBT. This is it's Councilmen and the Fathers. Most people who don't remember the 90s don't remember that everyone out there that was a very popular political opinion not to support same-sex marriage back in the day. However, over time it won. Democrats, we should represent the views of people, not a small number of homosexual extremists, she said at the time. Approximately 3 to 5% of the population is homosexual. And 97% of the population is not, so they're pushing for the tiny minority, which is more in line with what you see in the Democratic Party right now. They have got to focus on these ever increasingly smaller and smaller minorities. That is the entire point of it. And even though they're subsets of other groups, that has to be done. Let's see here. Anti-interventionism. Don't go to war. However, There's nothing wrong, of course, with expressing empathy for the soldiers who are sent to fight, lose limbs, and die in wars of choice launched by their political leaders. The suffering they and their families endure is heartbreaking, especially considering that many join the military because they lack other economic opportunities, and money spent on wars abroad would be better used on infrastructure at home. But Gabbard's almost singular focus on the damage these wars inflict domestically and her comparative lack of focus on carnage they wreak in other countries under attack is troubling. It's nationalism in an anti-war garb. Not wanting to send your troops overseas to die when it is unnecessary is nationalism in anti-war garb now. I don't get it. This is just crazy. Reinforcing, instead, undercutting the toxic rhetoric that treats foreigners less deserving of dignity than Americans. Her anti-war interventionism has even received praise from former KKK David Duke, who called for her to be named Secretary of State. That's not next level trolling. I don't know what is. Anyway, you should go and look her up. Overall, her policies seem very good. I think the idea of not going to war against people where there's no reason to, and the fact that people's opinions change over time, especially since the 90s. In short, when it comes to war against territories, I'm a hawk, she told Hawaiian Tribune last year. When it comes to counterproductive wars of regime change, I'm a dove. So, war on terrorists, good. War to change other countries, bad. So, that is exactly what I think a person should be. When it comes to attacking terrorists, foreign terrorists, let's do it. When it comes to invading countries to change the government, no. In other words, Gabbard would continue the Obama administration's foreign policy, which itself was a continuation in some ways, or ramping up of George W.'s policy. George W. actually invaded countries. He invaded multiple countries, and no. She would keep up the drone bombing of 7 Muslim countries in the Middle East and North Africa against terrorists, perhaps expanding it. There's nothing of that. Drones killed hundreds of civilians over Obama's 8 years. Special forces like SEAL Team 6 are known for their fair share of brutality. Yes, they go to these terrorist regions and they kill the people that need to be killed. 4 months ago, 30 civilians in Yemen. So the flip side of that is, instead of doing this, we should go on the ground and destroy the countries entirely, institute a regime change, because these are existential threats, maybe? I don't know. Unfortunate and disturbing, which brings us to Gabbard's other major red flags. Gives support for drones and special ops strikes. Not surprising that Gabbard never mentions U.S. foreign policy. It's a catalyst for anti-American sentiment in regions like the Middle East, despite copious evidence to the contrary. The Middle East, where we've engaged in massive regime changes and are a massive foreign power, perhaps we shouldn't be involved in so much. I mean, that's any praise from the other side means you're on the other side, even if you have no stances with them. Naturally, it wasn't long before she appeared on Bill Maher's program, where the two bonded over the mutual distrust of Islamic extremists and the disagreement with Kerry's comments. After agreeing with Maher that it was crazy Obama didn't want to use 2 magic words, Gabbard reiterated her point. Give them a big house, give them a skateboard, send them on the way. You don't think it's going to solve the problem? It's not. Yeah, cited Osama bin Laden as an example, a multimillionaire who left his mansions, went and lived in the desert because of his radical ideology. Yeah, this is a massive slander piece against her. And I don't know. So far, what I've read about her, I kind of like her. The whole idea of not invading countries because we want to, pulling our troops out after the job is done, not engaging in full-scale regime changes. That has never worked for the U.S. in the past. I mean, look at any country we've invaded, try to install a regime. It's just not the best idea. And then, of course, you can go look up the Syrian timeline, and you can see what's going on there, what has been going on there, and how it continually goes on there. Look it up. Thank you. This video is way too long. Goodbye.